I was insulted in court for having no career, but one blueprint changed the entire case. When Hannah returned to her apartment after a long shift at the architecture studio, something felt off. The silence was heavier than usual, almost intentional. She noticed the bookshelf looked lighter, a few personal items missing. Then, she saw it, a letter resting neatly on the kitchen counter, her name written in Jason's careful handwriting. Her stomach twisted before she even touched it. The contents were brief, cold, and devastating. Jason had left. Not just emotionally, but physically, legally. The divorce papers were already filed. He claimed she had no vision, that she had held him back, and that it was time for both of them to move forward separately. What stunned her more than his words was the suddenness. No warning, no arguments leading up to this. Just silence, then disappearance. She walked through the apartment in a daze. His wardrobe was nearly empty. Even the espresso machine, a gift from her mother, was gone. Pictures from vacations, books they had chosen together, the throw blanket she had knitted, it had all vanished like a planned extraction. But this wasn't a burglary. This was deliberate, strategic. It felt like being erased from her own life. And at the bottom of the letter, a note from his attorney: all future communication should go through legal channels. No explanations. No goodbyes. Just a clean cut from a man she had built her life around. Hannah wandered into the bedroom, staring at the closet doors as if opening them might rewrite the morning. But reality greeted her with cruel precision. His suits were gone, his watch box, the cologne she used to tease him for overusing. Even the worn hoodie she had stolen so many times during movie nights was no longer there. He had taken her favorite throw pillow, a piece of furniture she had designed in architecture school, and strangely, her grandmother's old sketchbook. He hadn't just left, he had chosen what mattered to him and discarded the rest. Including her. In the bathroom, toothbrush gone. Razor gone. His towels replaced with cleanly folded gaps on the shelf. She opened the vanity drawer to reach for her moisturizer, only to realize he had taken her skincare products too, products she had bought with their shared credit card. She blinked back, the sting in her eyes, realizing just how meticulous he had been in his exit. Not a single trace of his existence remained, but neither did hers. She checked their joint bank account and gasped. Zero. Every penny had been transferred out the night before. He had been planning this for a while, and now she was left with a shell of a home and no money to fight back. Later that evening, as she sat on the floor surrounded by scattered drawers and silence, her phone buzzed. It was a text message. From Jason's mother. The last time they had spoken was at the family's Christmas dinner, where she had been polite, if distant. The message was curt, soaked in disapproval. We always told him not to marry someone beneath him. Gold digging only works when there's gold to offer. Hannah's hands trembled. The cruelty wasn't surprising, but the timing felt like a coordinated attack. More messages followed from distant acquaintances, some subtle, others clearly taking sides. So sorry to hear what happened, one read. He deserves happiness, said another. Her friends, few since marriage, remained silent. Jason had always insisted they keep their circle small, but now it was evident he had slowly isolated her. Her support system had been dismantled brick by brick, just like the career she had paused to support his business. Her inbox became a stream of polite condolences and backhanded judgment, as if she had brought this on herself. She deleted each message slowly, one by one, forcing herself not to cry. Not yet. When Hannah arrived at her part-time position at a boutique architecture studio the next day, the whispers began before she even sat down. She had called in sick the day before, too shaken to face the world. But news of Jason's departure, and his sudden announcement of a new chapter on social media, had already spread. She caught snippets from the break room. "She must have known," someone said. "I heard he's already dating someone new," said another. No one approached her directly, but their stares said enough. They saw her not as a talented designer, but as a wife who had failed. She focused on her drafting tablet, sketching meaningless lines while her ears burned from the gossip. Her supervisor, usually warm, avoided eye contact. They had met Jason once at a gallery opening and had been clearly impressed by his charisma. The design director mentioned a new residential project that Hannah had hoped to lead, but now it was being reassigned due to her emotional state. That was the final crack. Her career, already stagnated by years of behind-the-scenes support for Jason's company, was now being chipped away by assumptions. Her identity was slipping through her fingers, replaced by one humiliating label after another: deserted wife, unstable employee, irrelevant. 2 weeks later, Hannah stepped into the courtroom for the first official divorce hearing. The room was colder than she expected, both in temperature and tone. Jason was already seated, flanked by a sleek team of corporate attorneys. His suit was immaculate, his posture confident, his expression unreadable. He didn't acknowledge her. She felt exposed, underdressed in a borrowed blazer and heels she hadn't worn in months. Her own legal representation had backed out last minute, citing a conflict of interest she didn't fully understand. So, she stood alone, carrying a folder of documents, hoping her presence would be enough. Jason's lawyer opened with a prepared statement that stung with every word. He described her as a dependent spouse with no income, no assets, and no substantial contributions to the marital estate. He referred to Jason's company as entirely self-built, minimizing their shared sacrifices. The attorney even made a point to highlight her current earnings, calling them occasional freelance gigs with negligible market value. The courtroom murmured softly. Hannah felt her throat tighten. She clutched the folder, biting the inside of her cheek, refusing to show weakness. But inside, the humiliation carved deep. Not because of the lies, but because no one questioned them. Hannah stood motionless as the courtroom digested the words just spoken. The opposing attorney smirked as he gestured toward her, remarking with theatrical flourish, "We are talking about someone who's essentially spent the last 6 years playing house." A wave of laughter rippled through the gallery, soft but piercing. Hannah's face flushed as she saw people exchange glances, some covering their mouths, others looking away in faux politeness. The judge remained silent, flipping through documents as if the humiliation unfolding wasn't worthy of intervention. She kept her eyes on the wooden edge of the table in front of her, trying to ground herself. Every muscle in her body wanted to run, to escape the prying eyes, the judgment, the reduction of her life into a caricature. But she stood still. Her silence was not surrender, only survival. Jason avoided looking at her completely. He sat with arms crossed, his leg bouncing with the ease of someone who believed the outcome was already sealed. Hannah realized then that this wasn't just about division of property. This was about erasing her. After court, Hannah sat in a coffee shop, her untouched drink growing cold as she stared at her laptop screen. She pulled up her old university records, feeling like she was searching for proof of a person she used to be. Her architecture degree, once her proudest achievement, had become a forgotten detail in a life defined by someone else's ambition. Jason had never truly acknowledged her credentials. Even when she helped him brainstorm layouts and brand concepts, he'd wave off her ideas as wife support, not professional input. She remembered late nights when he was preparing to pitch his startup idea, how she had stayed up editing his slides, drawing concept sketches, suggesting brand colors. She had taken unpaid freelance gigs so she could spend more time supporting him. Every sacrifice felt noble then, purposeful. Now, it just felt like erosion. She clicked through her old design files, hundreds of drafts and renderings, many of which had ended up suspiciously similar to the look of Jason's company. She stared at one sketch in particular, an office layout design from 5 years ago, and something inside her shifted. Maybe she hadn't been just a background character after all. Back in court the following week, Jason's legal team introduced new evidence. It wasn't financial, or even legal, just a slideshow of photos. They projected them on the screen as if unveiling damning proof. Images of Hannah cooking, cleaning, holding up swatches of wallpaper, cradling their cat. This, the lawyer said smugly, is not the work of a business partner. This is domestic leisure, not labor. More quiet chuckles. A few eyes in the room looked away, uncomfortable but still complicit. Hannah's stomach turned. Those photos had been private moments, shared in trust. And now they were being weaponized to prove that her contributions had no value. The irony was crushing. She had given up opportunities to support him from home, and now that choice was being used to strip her of all credibility. The term homemaker echoed in the courtroom like a curse. She caught sight of an older woman on the bench behind her, shaking her head slightly, her expression hard to read. Whether it was pity or recognition, Hannah couldn't tell. But it reminded her that she wasn't the first to be reduced like this. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. She sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, her apartment still half empty from Jason's departure. She stared at a framed photo of their first anniversary, smiling in front of the building they had both designed, at least in theory. Jason had always credited the layout to a freelancer, but Hannah remembered drawing the first concept on a napkin during brunch. He had laughed, taken a picture of it, and a week later told her he hired someone to clean it up. She never saw that original napkin again. The memory felt different now. At the time, she believed they were building something together. But in hindsight, it was clear, he had been laying the foundation for his own legend, brick by brick, and she was just a convenient stepping stone. Her ideas, her emotional labor, her willingness to step back, all of it had been claimed without acknowledgement. Her vision had been buried under his name. And the worst part was that she had let it happen, trusting love to be enough. At the next court recess, Hannah sat on the bench in the hallway, exhausted and numb. That's when a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "You don't know me," the woman said, "but I remember you from the gallery opening 2 years ago." She was neatly dressed, with a briefcase and a calm confidence. "I'm Maya Keller. I used to be Jason's assistant. Until I wasn't." Hannah looked up, confused. Maya sat beside her. "I saw what they did to you today. And I know for a fact that some of those design files, they were yours. I remember your initials on the drafts." Hannah blinked. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it. No one had believed her, not in the courtroom, not in her job, not even among old friends. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Maya looked away, her tone firm but kind. "Because I've been sitting with it for too long. And because I saw you being erased in real time. That was your work. I can help you prove it." Hannah swallowed hard. For the first time in weeks, she felt the slightest glimmer of hope. Not a victory, just a crack in the wall. But that was enough. 2 days later, Hannah met Maya at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Maya arrived with a small stack of folders and a flash drive, her expression serious but steady. "I kept copies," she said, sliding them across the table. Jason never noticed. He was too busy making sure the spotlight stayed on him. Hannah opened one folder and froze. There it was. A schematic drawing of the flagship workspace Jason always bragged about designing himself, but in the corner, clearly visible, were Hannah's initials and a date from years prior. Her breath caught in her throat. Maya explained how Jason would take early drafts from Hannah's laptop and pass them off to contractors as if they were his own. He'd insist on small revisions, then rebrand the work as company originals. He always made it sound like your input was just emotional support. Maya's voice tightened. But he knew. He knew where the Real design came from. Hannah stared at the documents in silence. The truth was there, in black and white lines, scale ratios, and annotations. Suddenly, her story wasn't just emotional. It was evidence. With Maya's materials in hand, Hannah met with a new attorney, one who specialized in intellectual property and contractual misconduct. After hours of reviewing the files, the attorney leaned back, eyebrows raised. "This changes everything," she said. "If we can prove Jason used your designs as foundational elements in his company, without credit or compensation, we're no longer just talking divorce. We're talking fraud. Misappropriation of intellectual property." Hannah sat in stunned silence. She had come to terms with losing everything, but now, the game had changed. They combed through emails, file timestamps, archived texts, and cloud storage backups. It was all there, years of sketches, concept notes, and even voice memos where Jason praised her ideas before presenting them as his own. And most crucially, the prenup they had signed, once deemed airtight, didn't mention intellectual property. "He assumed you'd never fight," her lawyer said. "He banked on your silence." Hannah's silence had once been love. Now it would be the root of her case. She left that office with something new in her hands, proof, and a strategy. At the next hearing, Jason sat with the same smugness he had always worn in court. He leaned in to whisper to his lawyer, then smirked directly at Hannah, as if daring her to try something new. When her attorney stood and introduced the new evidence, the room quieted. "We submit these architectural drafts, with verified metadata, demonstrating Mrs. Whitman's authorship of foundational layouts used in the early formation of Whitman Solutions, LLC." Jason's smirk faltered, just slightly. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Whitman, is it true these designs are in use at your company's headquarters?" Jason hesitated. "They were part of a collaborative process," he replied. His voice held its usual calm, but his hand twitched as he gripped the table. Maya was called next. Under oath, she detailed how Jason used Hannah's drafts, often modifying them minimally before claiming full credit. "He told me never to mention her name in presentations," she added. The courtroom shifted in energy. For the first time, the narrative had a crack. That evening, a tech blog ran a snide piece titled "The Desperate Housewife Strikes Back." The article framed Hannah as a bitter ex, trying to tear down her husband's success. It quoted Jason's anonymous source saying she was clinging to relevance with stories about napkin sketches. The comments were worse, dismissive, cruel, mocking her appearance and doubting her credentials. It was a digital version of the courtroom smirks, and it stung just as sharply. Hannah nearly deleted the article on impulse, but stopped. Instead, she read it again, slowly this time, not for pain, but for pattern. She realized Jason was trying to win the public as much as the legal battle. He was spinning a narrative where she was nothing more than a jealous ex. Let him laugh, her lawyer told her. The truth isn't always loud, but it endures. The next morning, Hannah woke up early, brewed a cup of coffee, and organized her files again. The smear campaign was desperate. That alone gave her strength. A few days later, while reviewing documents in the courthouse hallway, an older woman approached Hannah. She wore a dark suit and walked with quiet authority. "I've been watching your case," she said softly. "I retired from litigation 2 years ago. But your story," she paused, eyes sharp. "It reminded me of why I practiced law in the first place." The woman introduced herself as Judith Renner, once one of the top trial attorneys in the state. Hannah blinked, unsure if she had heard right. "I'm not here to take over," Judith continued. "But I'd like to help behind the scenes. Strategy, witness prep, optics. This case, it matters." Hannah didn't know what to say. For weeks, she had been standing alone, battling humiliation in silence. And now, a stranger, someone seasoned, someone respected, was offering her guidance, not pity. That night, Hannah cried in her kitchen, quietly, letting the tears fall not from despair, but from the fragile relief that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. With Judith's support, Hannah's case took a sharper edge. They spent long hours cross-referencing old contracts, dissecting email threads, and reanalyzing calendar events from years ago. Judith pointed out how Jason had used vague language to obscure her involvement in projects, often referring to her as a domestic partner providing feedback instead of acknowledging her contributions as an architectural designer. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became, Jason had been rewriting history in real time, minimizing her at every step while maximizing his image as a self-made entrepreneur. But it wasn't just about past documents. Judith urged Hannah to look into old devices, USB drives, backup phones, forgotten email accounts. On an old hard drive, Hannah found a trove of voice memos where she and Jason brainstormed layouts, naming her directly as the source of several ideas. "Let's go with your version, Han," he said in one, laughing. "It always works better when I use your designs anyway." That single sentence, buried in an old audio file, was more powerful than 100 diagrams. It was his voice, his words, and it confirmed everything she'd been trying to prove. Late one night, while preparing for the next hearing, Judith received an encrypted email from an unknown sender. Attached was a short recording, time-stamped from just weeks earlier. The file opened with Jason's voice, laughing arrogantly. "She's harmless," he scoffed. "She thinks a few old sketches are enough to take down a company. She was never supposed to win." Another voice chimed in, his lead attorney, chuckling. "Don't worry, we've got this. Let her talk. It only makes her look more emotional." Hannah listened to the clip in stunned silence, her hand clenching the arm of her chair. They had underestimated her, deeply and publicly. That was their fatal mistake. The recording wasn't just inflammatory, it revealed a level of manipulation and confidence in misleading the court. When Hannah's lawyer submitted the file as supplementary evidence, the judge ordered a private review. "We'll reconvene with clarity," the judge said, his tone far more serious than before. Jason looked shaken for the first time. He glanced at Hannah, but she didn't meet his eyes. She had nothing to say to a man who had made her silence part of his plan. During the next session, the courtroom felt palpably different. The judge's demeanor was firmer, his patience thinner. Jason's attorney attempted to dismiss the recording as irrelevant venting, but the judge wasn't swayed. What concerns me, he said sternly, is the apparent premeditation to discredit the opposing party not just outside this courtroom, but as part of a coordinated legal strategy. The gallery was silent. Hannah felt the room turn ever so slightly in her favor, not because of sympathy, but because truth was gaining traction. Then came the pivotal moment. Hannah's lawyer presented side-by-side images, one of Hannah's original blueprint, dated and signed, and the other from Jason's corporate presentation, eerily identical but stripped of attribution. "And who received this presentation?" the lawyer asked Maya on the stand. "Investors," Maya replied. "Some of whom were told that Jason designed it himself." A ripple of murmurs followed. Jason shifted in his seat. For once, his usual confidence looked more like discomfort. Jason's usual smirk had vanished. As Hannah watched him squirm under cross-examination, she could see his foundation beginning to crack. He stumbled over answers, contradicting prior statements. When asked about the initial concept for the company's headquarters, he replied vaguely, it was a collaborative idea. But when pressed on who physically created the drafts, he hesitated, then muttered, "I don't recall." His uncertainty wasn't convincing, it was damning. The judge leaned forward. "You don't recall who designed the building you use to this day?" Meanwhile, Judith sat beside Hannah, noting each shift in tone, each inconsistency. "He's unraveling," she whispered. Hannah nodded but didn't smile. This wasn't a victory yet, it was a reckoning in progress. But it felt different now. For the first time, Jason looked small. Not because he was losing, but because the lies that once made him look powerful were now making him look hollow. His empire, once built on curated charisma and borrowed ideas, was starting to crumble in front of the very people he had convinced to believe in him. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A junior analyst at Jason's company, who had followed the trial closely, anonymously submitted an internal memo to Hannah's legal team. The memo, dated from 3 years ago, referred to original concepts courtesy of H. Whitman in an internal product briefing. The initials alone were a quiet acknowledgement, but it proved that even within the company, Hannah's work was once recognized before being buried under Jason's branding. "I knew I had seen her name somewhere before," the analyst's note read. It wasn't right what they did. The document was verified and admitted into court. The defense tried to dismiss it as informal communication, but the judge was visibly annoyed. "It suggests knowledge within the organization of her contributions," he said. "That cannot be ignored." The memo became a turning point, not just legally, but narratively. It was the first written piece from Jason's side that directly connected Hannah's initials to official company materials. It turned what had seemed like a domestic dispute into a case of professional erasure. And in that courtroom, perception was everything. When Maya returned to the stand for a second round of questioning, the courtroom leaned in. This time, she came prepared with printouts, emails, meeting notes, and internal memos where Jason specifically credited Hannah's designs during the early stages of the company. He'd say things like, "My wife's sketches are a great starting point," or "Let's run this by Hannah," she testified. But those words never left the room. When it came time to present anything externally, her name disappeared. Her tone was steady, but her eyes betrayed guilt. "I stayed quiet because I thought it didn't matter. I was wrong." Hannah listened, heart pounding. It was strange hearing someone else narrate pieces of her life she had almost forgotten. The judge asked one final question. "Do you believe Mrs. Whitman was intentionally excluded from credit?" Maya hesitated only a moment. "Yes. Absolutely." That single word shifted the energy in the room. Jason, whose arms had remained crossed for most of the hearing, now sat forward, jaw tight. The performance was cracking. The image of the flawless CEO was slipping away, and in its place stood a man suddenly unsure of his ground. In the past, Jason had carried himself like someone untouchable. His posture in court was always relaxed, leaning back in his seat with a faint grin, as though he were humoring the whole process. But now, as the evidence built and witnesses like Maya dismantled his carefully constructed narrative, that grin slowly disappeared. His suit looked less crisp. His confidence, once so magnetic, had begun to feel forced, even desperate. He glanced frequently at his lawyer, whispered frantically during recesses, and avoided looking at Hannah altogether. During one cross-examination, he was asked to explain why Hannah's designs were found embedded in his company's proprietary documents. "I must have imported some of her drafts by mistake," he said. The courtroom went still. The judge raised an eyebrow. By mistake? Despite them being labeled, signed, and stored in a shared company archive? Jason hesitated, then mumbled something about oversight. The answer didn't satisfy anyone, not the judge, not the gallery, and certainly not Hannah. For the first time, he looked like a man who realized he was losing control. Then came the bombshell. Hannah's attorney presented an archived email chain between Jason and his investors, dated just months after the company launched. In it, Jason pitched their vision using attached concept art that had been created entirely by Hannah. "My wife had the idea," he wrote casually in one message. "I just turned it into a pitch deck." The statement was clear, undeniable, and time-stamped. The courtroom gasped softly. Even Jason's attorney closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing for the inevitable. Hannah stared at the screen, her heart both breaking and rising. It was validation, yes, but it was also betrayal laid bare in his own words. He hadn't just stolen credit, he had openly admitted the truth when it benefited him privately, then discarded her in public. Her stomach turned, but she stood taller. She had spent years shrinking herself to make space for his ego. Now, finally, the truth had a voice, and it was his own that confirmed it. As the courtroom reconvened the next day, the energy was thick with tension. Jason was called to testify once again, this time with the newly uncovered emails at the center of questioning. His lawyer tried to object repeatedly, but the judge allowed the questioning to continue. "Did you write this?" the attorney asked, pointing to the message admitting Hannah's role. Jason shifted in his seat, looking cornered. "Yes," he muttered. "But it was just an expression. She didn't build the company. Did she contribute intellectual property that was presented to investors?" There was a long pause. Jason looked around, as if searching for a way out. "She shared ideas," he finally said. The courtroom buzzed. "So you lied to this court under oath when you claimed the company was built entirely on your designs?" The silence that followed was deafening. Jason didn't answer. His lawyer whispered furiously into his ear, but the damage was done. It was the day everything unraveled. And for Hannah, it was the first time in months that she felt the air in her lungs deepen without shaking. That afternoon, one final piece of evidence was submitted, a voice recording from an informal dinner between Jason, his lawyer, and a mutual friend. The friend, unaware he was being recorded, asked about the risk of Hannah winning the case. Jason laughed. "She was never supposed to win," he said. "She doesn't have the guts. Or the money. Let her cry in court if she wants. She'll fade out like always." Those words hit the courtroom like a slap. There was no defense. No spin. Just raw arrogance exposed to the public ear. The judge sat back, his expression unreadable. "We will recess," he said slowly, "and reconvene tomorrow for closing statements." As the room emptied, Hannah remained seated, her hands folded, her expression calm. Jason stood near the exit, but didn't leave. He looked at her for the first time in weeks. Not with contempt, not with superiority, but with something closer to fear. She met his gaze, steady and unblinking. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: she had already shattered the illusion. The courtroom was packed the next day, anticipation hanging in the air like a held breath. Hannah's lawyer delivered a closing argument that was not only thorough, but deeply human. She described a woman who sacrificed her own career to support her husband's ambitions. She spoke of stolen credit, intentional erasure, and the slow suffocation of a voice once filled with promise. "This is not just about finances," she said. "It's about truth. It's about a woman's right to exist in the story she helped build." The room remained silent, every word resonating. Jason's defense followed, noticeably subdued. Gone were the flourishes, the confidence, the swagger. His lawyer stumbled through a response, focusing on legal technicalities and minimizing the emotional aspects. But it was too late. The judge had heard enough. The tide had shifted not just in Hannah's favor, but in the court's perception of Jason. As proceedings adjourned for deliberation, Hannah stepped outside into the autumn air, inhaling deeply. It was the first time the courthouse hadn't felt like a battleground, but a space where her voice had finally echoed. While awaiting the judge's decision, Hannah returned to the courtroom for a smaller hearing involving post-trial motions. As she entered, she noticed something different. Women, strangers, sat in the gallery, watching quietly, respectfully. Some nodded subtly when she passed. One even squeezed her hand as she walked by. They weren't here out of obligation. They were witnesses, supporters, and perhaps reflections of their own battles. Hannah hadn't realized how public her case had become, but now she understood: her story had stirred something deeper. During a short recess, one woman approached her in the hallway. "I just wanted to say thank you," she whispered. "I was in a similar marriage. Watching you stand up, it gave me courage." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. She had walked into this war feeling utterly alone. But she had unknowingly lit a match in others' darkness. These women weren't just observing, they were healing through her story. And now, whether she won or lost, something larger than the verdict had already been set in motion. As the final day of judgment approached, a surprising twist occurred. Hannah's attorney called an unexpected witness to testify in a follow-up session: Jason's own cousin, Natalie, a former financial advisor who had once worked with the company during its early development. Jason visibly stiffened when he saw her take the stand. "I kept quiet because I didn't want to be pulled into family drama," Natalie began. "But I can't do that anymore. What's happening here isn't right." Natalie proceeded to share how Jason had asked her to create financial documents that excluded Hannah's name from company ownership, despite Hannah's known involvement. "He told me it was just easier that way," said Hannah didn't care about credit. Gasps filled the room. Jason's legal team scrambled, but it was too late. Natalie's testimony was clear, detailed, and sincere. It wasn't just betrayal from within, it was a confession of intent. Jason's efforts to erase Hannah had been deliberate, orchestrated, and now fully exposed. The judge returned with a verdict 2 days later. His statement was measured but firm. This court finds sufficient evidence that Mrs. Whitman contributed materially to the creation and development of the business known as Whitman Solutions, and was willfully denied credit and compensation. Hannah was awarded half of the company's equity, financial restitution, and moral damages. But more than the outcome, it was the judge's final words that stuck with everyone: silencing someone's role does not erase it. It only delays the truth. Jason sat frozen, his world collapsing in the very courtroom he once controlled. His public image as a self-made visionary was now tarnished beyond repair. Investors began to pull out, press inquiries flooded in, and employees began to distance themselves. The man who once smirked in court now avoided eye contact with everyone. For Hannah, watching him break wasn't satisfying, it was sobering. There was no joy in seeing someone fall, but there was peace in knowing he could no longer stand on stolen ground. Shortly after the verdict, Jason's attorneys requested a private meeting. Hannah, alongside her legal team, agreed to sit down. The mood in the room was heavy, subdued. Jason didn't speak at first. When he finally did, his voice was small. "I didn't think you'd go through with it," he said. "You never fought back before." Hannah looked at him, her expression steady. "That was your mistake," she replied. "You confused silence with weakness." He nodded slowly, then reached for the settlement papers. As they finalized the terms, Jason mumbled, "I lost more than just the company." Hannah didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The meeting ended quietly, no theatrics, no apologies that could erase what had happened. As Hannah stepped into the corridor, she paused for a moment before walking out. Her steps were slow but strong. This time, she didn't feel like she was escaping a place, she was walking out whole, for the first time in years.